Welcome to the Grow As We Go podcast. I'm Sam, breathwork and embodiment coach, muse, and self-growth junkie.
And I'm Anthony, your co-host, transformational men's coach, and general question asker.
Here we create space for natural, vulnerable, and deeply connecting conversations on life as it happens, wisdom I've picked up along the way, and tools to truly enjoy this beautiful life you've been given. I want to appreciate you for being here, whether this is your first time or you've been here since the beginning. We love feedback here, so leave your thoughts and takeaways from this episode in the reviews section of this podcast. This also helps the podcast become a bit more relevant in search reviews. Another way you can support this podcast is by following me on Instagram at Samantha__Charles and take a screenshot of this episode to share it on your social media and share your takeaways so that your junkie friends can come and get their fix too. Hello and welcome to another episode of Grow As We Go. I'm Sam and today it's me and Anthony.
Hello.
Usual. And today we're going to talk about, just in time for Valentine's Day, self-love and self-pleasure.
Delightful. It's funny that you say in time for Valentine's Day like it's something you regularly celebrate.
LOL.
But from what I remember...
Yeah, it's funny because it's like, it's this, I always say, I call it a Hallmark holiday. Yeah. It totally has become that. And I think, I don't really celebrate Valentine's Day. Yeah. Like I haven't probably for, almost ever. And it's just, I think that self-love and self-pleasure and like every day should be Valentine's Day.
You're exactly right. I was thinking that.
Every day should also be Mother's Day and Father's Day. It's like these Hallmark holidays that are really interesting. But I think, similarly to like going on retreats or going on workshops, like you have a day to remember, and like to maybe refocus and realign your vision to your life. And then like, okay, so from here on forward with Valentine's Day coming, like how can you use that day as a day to maybe initiate yourself or start treating yourself with more love than you have, like using the day as like a reminder.
Yeah, it's like a highlighter.
Right. And so that's a good lesson right off the bat to like take what you learn here and not only implement it on Valentine's Day, but every day.
That's right.
Even today. Mm-hmm. That's not Valentine's Day yet.
Have fun with it.
Yeah. And so today we're going to talk about like self-love and self-pleasure and what the difference is, as well as some like practical tips that are not only going to be sexual. I think, self-pleasure is a term that's like essentially masturbation with like a little bit more intention. But there's different ways to show self-love and even self-pleasure, honestly, that's not like going straight for the gonads, you know what I
mean? Yeah. Which is funny because I know that there's a lot of people who think that automatically. And so, we're shifting away into a sense of like allowing lots of things to be pleasurable. And especially like even that word pleasure, like it's funny. It has
a sexual connotation.
It does. It really does. And just in my world that I grew up in, right, it was like pleasure. You avoid all kinds of pleasure. And it's like, well, that explains a lot. So.
Yeah, well, I think, pleasure is like of the body, and there's that like sense of the flesh conversation, and like that the body's bad, and the desires of the body are bad and going to get you in trouble. So, yeah. I've had a really interesting, like, I guess, educational piece or, something I share about frequently where it's like pleasure is not only sexual. Sure, sex is a pleasurable experience. But there's also, pleasure is like in coffee that's made just perfectly. Right. It's in the sand beneath your feet and the grass and the wet dew in your toes.
The sun on your skin.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Yeah, so, like a really yummy freaking cookie,
Oh my gosh.
And
it's the way you love yourself too. There's pleasure in the way that we love ourselves.
Yeah, and there, like you can find pleasure too in just like like these freaking sweatpants that I got that my mom got for me. Like they're so soft, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I could love this, you know. And it's soft. It feels good. It's pleasurable.
So we're talking about pleasure. We're talking about self-love. But what is self-love, Sam? What does that even mean?
Yeah, what does that even mean? I think self-love is a term that's like thrown around haphazardly, and my experience of self-love is like gratitude, a practice of gratitude.
Nice.
And it's hard because I think that in this culture we're taught to be selfless, like not selfless, but like giving, like over giving, where you're like self-depreciating.
Oh, that's a really good word for it. Yeah.
And showing yourself self-love is like seen as selfish. That's been my experience, especially from like motherhood.
Right. If you think about like the corporate world and then the home, that like those things get put into each other. Like the person who's in the corporate world self-depreciates himself for the corporation, and the person who's at home self-depreciates himself for the kids, for the house, or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's a cycle.
It's that like over giving and pouring from an empty cup sort of like conversation.
Right.
And I know that I've experienced that too, right? Like you do everything for your kids, to the point of like self-depreciation.
Yeah.
And I just don't buy into that anymore. I think that you need to pour into your cup and find ways to do that. I know a lot of people are kind of living in survival in that aspect.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But there are ways that you can pour into yourself.
Yeah.
Boundaries,
simple.
Bro.
Yeah. Yeah. And we often think about self-love as just like, not often think, but some people are like, oh, I'm going to go be really hippy dippy and give myself a big hug, and like, or it's like, oh, I'm going to go pamper myself and go to the spa. Like,
yeah, you can, like, self-love doesn't have to be this like extravagant bougie ass, like I'm going to go on a vacation by myself into the woods, or like go on a day spa. Like, those are all self-love things, but there's a lot of self-love things that you can do that don't cost anything except for your time. Taking a bath is self-love. Yep. Like being intentional, and I think it's all about the intention that in which you're spending your time. Like reading a book could be self-love.
Right. And it's so easy to get caught up in that idea of like, okay, I'm gonna go read a book in the tub. Gosh, I'm being so selfish because I can hear all the things that are going on out there, and I know there's someone's waiting for me to get done with this so that they can get what they want. It's like, okay.
Yeah, I know that's been my experience in motherhood.
Yeah.
For sure.
What if there was a shift? What if there was a shift from, like, I'm not doing this to be selfish. I'm doing this so that I have anything to give. Mm-hmm. Because I'm not giving out of my emptiness. I'm giving out of my abundance.
Yeah, I've had that conversation frequently with people, and just a lot of, I guess, my teachings are around like, you can't pour from an empty cup. Right. And people try to pour from an empty cup, but they're getting like a fraction of your energy and what you could possibly give if you were giving from an overflowing cup.
Yeah.
And I think the standard narrative is like, well, I don't have time to fill my cup. Ugh. And it's like, no, you have time to fill your cup. You just have to find it and protect it.
Right.
Because a lot of the times, I know for me in my personal experience, it's like really, really easy to allow other things to take my time that I had allotted for myself.
Right.
But like somebody else is asking for my time, and I'm like, okay, I give it up, and then there's nothing left for me. Well, guess what? I gave it all up. I didn't have to do that. I didn't have the boundaries and the skills in order to place those boundaries and hold them. Right. It was like the skills and the like self-worth, honestly, to know that I'm worth taking time for. I'm worth protecting my time so that I can pour into my cup and love on myself.
Yeah. What are some of the steps you took to realize that in the first place, that like, oh wow, I am worthy of taking time for myself, and not just worthy but necessary to take time for myself?
Well, I think that is discussed in episode 1.
Yes.
My story.
We'll do a Cliff's Notes version then.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was just, that workshop that I went to that was like, or the training that I just realized that there was a lot of a lack of self-worth that I didn't realize I had. I didn't realize that was going on. It was all unconscious. And having that brought into the light was really eye-opening for me. And I mean, if you're curious for deeper into that story, check out episode 1.
It's a good one.
Yeah, I think so.
So that...
Well, before we move on, I'm curious about, so we talked about, motherhood and pouring from an empty cup and self-love, and I feel like a lot of that's from probably, a woman or a mother's perspective. So what has that look like for you as a manly man?
We're manly men. So for me, personally, it's going to be weird because I don't see myself as a manly man, but...
That's why I joked about that.
I know, it's funny. The thing that comes to mind for me is that I just was codependent for a really long time. If you go back to my story, which is episode 3, I talk about the ways where I learned about boundaries, and I had been really codependent for a very long time based off of things that happened with my father. And so what that looked like for me was that I would just push my needs to the side. I would say, I'll either take care of that later or I won't take care of that at all so that I can fix something else. We've talked about this, you and I, Sam, a little bit. The terminology is take your own hand. So we were in the car and I was holding your hand and my phone fell over or something like that with the directions on it. And so I needed to grab it real quick.
And you're driving.
And I grabbed it, put my knee on the wheel and grabbed it with the other hand. And she was like, "What are you doing?" You need to take your hand. And I was like, oh yeah. Sometimes I don't even think about it. The ways in which I'm clearly I want to hold on to this person or something. So I'm going to do something
put
else.
My life at risk.
Yeah. And the life of the person next to me. And it has been so unconscious, the ways in which I've given that up. The ways in which I'm not paying attention to my own needs. And so what it is I'm not paying attention to my own needs, especially in favor of others' needs, because I had historically been really good at taking care of other people, especially to the detriment of myself.
Amen.
So,
and a woman.
Right. So I would completely forego the idea of self-love because the self wasn't really a concept. The self only existed as a part of the family unit or the church or whatever. What Anthony wanted at that time wasn't really a factor. I got to give myself what I wanted once everybody else had gotten what they wanted. And if there was no room for that, then there was no room for that. And I had to wait until next time, which, I like to say I'm a really patient person. But maybe I just don't think about my own needs as urgent or necessary, or hadn't at that point. Because now I'm leaning more into what would it feel like for me to say, this is what I need, this is what I'm looking for, this is how I would like something. And understanding that not everybody can meet your needs in that way, but even being able to speak it out loud, whether or not someone can do something about it, is still okay. And I know that for a long time I had not felt like I was even able to have needs at all because that would have been a selfish thing to express.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you're, talking about putting other people first, and that's kind of what I was talking about too. And so it's these different, but their come from is different, or the
sure,
conditioning or whatever, but essentially it's
sure,
still putting other people before yourself. And
right.
I think there's a lot of conditioning in society in general, men and women, right? Women, it's for the betterment of your children and for your partner and for other people. And then men, it's there's a lot of training around I think about the armed forces, and it's
sure,
you put your life.
Yeah,
everyone's more important than you.
Country, God, and then you like are somewhere further down the list or something like that.
Yeah, well, and so then it's like, you put everybody before you, right? You make sure everyone's needs are taken care of before your own, and that's kind of what you were speaking to. And,
and that can be a corporate environment too. Like your work to this place comes first, and like I know you got a basketball game for your kid, but you can't miss this work thing, and it's like, well, screw that.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways that work gets in the way for so many people, and we feel like a sense of like we owe it, or like it's oh, they're counting on me and they really need me. And just I think that there's a really interesting conversation and reassessment that should or could or gets to happen. I'm like, I don't know, it should happen. But not to tell anybody what should and shouldn't happen, but it should. That like could possibly happen around like the reassessment of your values and the reassessment of what truly is important. There's things going around, different memes or just topics of conversation around that, like your place at the workspace is replaceable, and your role as a parent is irreplaceable. And so which one's more important, really, truly?
Right.
Yes, your job does help you support your family, but it's like, are you actually going to get fired for missing? Are you actually going to get fired for upholding some boundaries? Maybe, but like probably not, especially the amount of times, But I think that's where the conversation of boundaries comes in. And we did an episode, episode 12, which is about boundaries and like a practical guide to learning how to set boundaries, because I think as a culture we are not taught or role modeled good boundary setting.
Oh, amen. And a woman.
Yeah.
So, and within that conversation then comes the idea that when you have this self-love, that there is something else that stops you from accessing the love that you have for yourself, and that's shame. Hooray. And
we have another episode about that.
We do.
Episode 18, I believe, ditching shame for better sex and more freedom. And I think like I said in the beginning, like I feel like a lot of this podcast and a lot of my teachings, like it includes sex, and also it's not only all about sex. And so I don't want to be like, it's kind of a taboo topic for some people, I think. And again, this is a shame conversation, so listen to that episode. But it's like there's liberation in like releasing shame.
For sure.
There is personal liberation. There is sexual liberation. Like it's just all around really liberating to like release shame, because when you release shame, you can be truly authentic in your expression of yourself. Yeah. In whatever like realm you're in.
Right. And I think we have talked a little bit about this, how Gabor Mate says that in a lot of places you value connection over authenticity. And for some reason you want to connect to your community, and so you don't share the authentic self. Like, and I'll speak from experience. There's been a lot of cases where I am a very sexual person. It's a thing that happens. I like it a lot. It's fun. And again, as a pastor, and I've talked about this in my story too, but as a pastor, you almost can't say that. Like it's as if
and
that
a teacher.
part, and a teacher. Oh my gosh, yeah. It's almost as if that part of myself hadn't existed except for behind closed doors, and I wasn't allowed to talk about it, wasn't allowed to mention it, and like it's one of my favorite things to talk about. For one, it's so much fun. Two, I've read a whole lot about it and experienced a lot of it. And then three, like it's such a sacred, wonderful, powerful, moving, transformative thing that if we were to talk about it more openly, then maybe it wouldn't be such a behind closed doors thing.
Yeah, and like a taboo and again shameful topic. But yeah, I think if you're interested in more, definitely check out that episode 18, because we really, we talk about all that basically in a lot of depth. And so Which brings us to the topic
Yes.
of self-pleasure and self-pleasure practices. And I want this to be like a beginner's like ease you into it kind of thing if you've been following for a little while or, you know, new here either way. I plan on doing like another more like, I guess, deeper dive into self-pleasure practices after it'll probably be in April because I have a whole menstruation madness for March. That's funny. Planned where every week we have guests that are going to come on and talk about just women and how we have been taught to live by a certain cycle of, you know, the traditional like male patriarchal like training and like things are good for you. This is the way you should work out. This is the way you should eat. This is the way you should do this, that, and the other. And a lot of it's geared towards the way that men's bodies work. And there's not a lot of information or teaching that I've experienced in my life. And I know a lot of people I've talked to, you know, don't have this information around a woman's body and what could be better for them.
Right.
So we were going to talk about nutrition and working out and like the moon and just a lot of really, really cool stuff that I think will be really eye-opening for women learning more about their menstrual cycle and becoming more in tune with their bodies. So that's the plan for March.
Right.
So
and you've got a thing afterwards that'll help.
Yeah, so I'm going to be doing a yoni massage training that I'm like super excited about. So that's more to come in the coming months. But I do want to do like a deeper dive into self-pleasure practices because I have personally found it and incredibly transformative and really, anyway, I'll dive in more to it. But this will be a beginner's guide where... There's like a lot of ways you can experience pleasure, you know, right. and it's all about like we were speaking earlier about like taking a bath or reading a book and like it just being the intention that you bring to this space to create this like sacred container where you're filling up your cup.
Right.
And like noticing that it doesn't have to be hours and hours, you know, it could be like 10 minutes.
Right.
Yeah. So, again, like it not all being about sex or it being sexual and like that it's about using your senses and showing gratitude and appreciation for those senses. Like there's a lot of things in our sensual with the senses nature that can be incredibly pleasurable and like bringing reverence to it.
Right. I think about eating like a really good, like you said, eating a really good cookie or like having a great piece of key lime pie, right? Like something that you slow down.
Yeah.
And you let yourself focus on the joy of that experience. So, this feels good in my mouth. This
juicy strawberry.
Tastes good to me. Yeah, exactly. Right? Like peaches. Anything where you can choose to slow down and find the joy in it is a really good like self-pleasure practice. I find myself doing so. I really like to play games. It's one of my favorite things. I find a lot of joy and pleasure in just basking in the laughter and the joy of being with people and playing a game. When someone puts their hand on your shoulder and starts laughing because of something funny that you said, finding the joy in that. When you're making hand puppets from a game that you made up out of nowhere and people are just enjoying that company, it can be really easy to find pleasure if you're intentional about looking for it. And instead of looking for all the things that are like, oh, I wish this was better, I wish this was different, or like I'm not allowed to find joy in this, to change your mindset from I'm not allowed to find joy to it is the most pleasurable, joyful, divine experience, to shift into a mindset that allows you to let all those senses be felt and then to let them fill you up, to fill up your cup. It's really cool.
Yeah. So I think when we moving into like practical tips. So like we were talking about awareness.
Yeah.
I think awareness is huge, like to notice when you have the time.
That's right.
To notice that. And then again, with the bringing in the boundaries, like have boundaries for your time.
Right.
Like
I'm going to be here for this amount of time, and when I'm done, then I will be able to supply and provide and be available for everyone else's needs.
Yeah. And I think what's helped me with that too is like putting things on my calendar and like treating it as if, I mean, I think I shared this in my story, but it's like borrowing my, I don't know if loyalty is the right word, but, I guess respect would be the word. Borrowing my respect for others and their time and pretending that like I'm doing this with somebody else, you know, like if I were to set up a date or, you know, like a coffee date or lunch date with a friend, like I would go and, you know, I wouldn't like put other things on top of it. Right. Or if I did, I'd like renegotiate when when, hey, something else came up, I need to renegotiate this time that we're meeting. And so you get to treat yourself like as an other. And I think that kind of comes full circle with what we were talking about earlier, where we put others before ourselves. For sure. And so if you're new to that being a practice, you know, where you can like see, oh, I'm not giving myself the respect that I give others. Right.
And let's hold for a second and realize that, like, I wonder if a lot of people actually do that. They think, okay, I do think that I should get this, and I know that I deserve that, and maybe it's a little bit selfish, but whatever. But let's also be aware that, like, you get to be awareness of your inner critic, and you also get to be aware that other people may push back. Like, that people in your world may say, like, no, you don't get that because I need you to take care of the kids. Or no, you don't get that because of whatever. Not saying that explicitly or out loud, but like, how many times has there been consequences for you taking time out to care for yourself? Like, you get to be aware of the fact that those consequences aren't yours to manage. Like, I guess that in a roundabout sense, they become yours to manage because someone might put that on you. But like, that's not the kind of experience that you want to be having. And so if that does happen, then you get to have a larger conversation. And you get to say, look, the experience that we're having together, whoever it may be, whether it's your mom or a loved one or a spouse or a friend even, it's like, look, if I don't take care of myself, if I don't do that, then this isn't going to work. Because then you are going to take and take and take and take. And obviously that's not how you have a conversation about that. But you get to be very clear in saying, I'm setting my boundaries. I want to experience the world, life, relationship with you, with the kids, with whoever. And so in order to do that in a healthy way, I also get to do these things. And we can negotiate when that happens, but we don't get to negotiate that it gets to happen. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, like whenever you were talking, I was thinking about the perceptions episode that we did. I think it's the one before boundary. Yeah. So it's episode 11 about perceptions, and then episode 12, which is about boundaries. And for me, perceptions has come into play where it's like, oh, I think somebody's going to get mad if I say no to their ask of my time. When I already have plans for myself. So I'm just going to go ahead and put them first, and okay, yeah, sure, I'll do what they said. Yeah, interesting. And it's, you know, it's interesting. I think perceptions and boundaries, for me anyway, and maybe for many of you, plays like they are in cahoots, you know? Like there's this perception and this story that I make up that they're going to get mad at me, and so therefore I don't put up a boundary because I don't want them to get mad at me. Even though if you said no, they probably would just be like, okay. You know, like literally no big deal. But I think that comes into play too whenever it's like, you know, work and like thinking that they need you and this, and you know, a friend of mine, we were looking at going on a trip, and she's like, I don't want to bother her and like ask for these days off and and then she sent me a screenshot because I was like, well, we need to know, you know? And so she went ahead and asked, and then the response was like, oh, that sounds so exciting. Yeah, I don't see any problem with that. Yeah. And it's like, okay. Of course. Of course it's like that. Okay, so practical tips. What you went off on a tangent there.
That's
typically my MO. What's happening here?
One of the practical tips is have the boundary conversation. If the boundary conversation doesn't go well, then remember that your boundaries are you, right? Like, so yes, you're going to have to go back to the Limits of Love and Practical Guide to Boundaries, episode 12, to get more of that language around that. But that's part of the major tip in that practical sense is you have to set the boundary. And sometimes you set the boundary with people who don't like that you're setting a boundary with them, but you get to go ahead and do that anyway.
Yeah. So like a tip would be creating a date with yourself and putting it on your calendar, and then coming up with whatever protective mechanisms, like learning about boundaries or understanding your perceptions of what you think people or stories are making up, so that you can have that time and create that time and treat it as sacred and worthy.
Yes.
Like you're worthy of your own time.
Yes.
That's a funny thing to say. And I think too within that, so that's a tip, right? Make it on a calendar. And then to begin to like spend time within yourself, like self-awareness, and paying attention to like your inner critic or like judgmental parts of you that are saying things that are not nice. They say a lot of times we're our own worst critic. And I know for me, that's been true. We judge ourselves so harshly. And so I was talking with a friend today. Actually, I was on a different podcast as a guest. And she was talking about, it's been really helpful for her. And I hadn't thought about it quite like this, but because we're talking about the body and how wise our bodies are. And she said it was really helpful for her to think of the body as almost like this third entity where it's like her or him, depending on where you live. But what sort of body you live in. So it's like her, and using that as like a third entity, because again, I feel like it borrows that like respect you have for others in a way. But it's like thinking of your body as a different entity. And so if you can think of yourself as a different entity, like would you talk to a loved one the way you're talking to yourself? And having awareness in that critic, and like think about what he or she is saying in your mind. I mean, my inner critic is a guy, so it doesn't, like none of that matters. But or one of them. I have several critics, but
it's the whole conglomeration.
That's besides the point. But yeah, just like having awareness around your inner critic and the judge, and catching it when it happens, because so much of our like inner workings and inner conversation is so unconscious. Like you don't even realize it's happening. Right. But yeah, and I think with that, like treating yourself and treating your body with like, again, this reverence of like your body is a vessel that you get to experience life, and like what a gift, and what a like it's magical. It is. How could you judge it for the way that it looks when it's literally a living miracle? It's beautiful. So yeah, I
mean, how could you judge it? But yeah, we find a way.
We always find a way. Yeah. But I know that's like grace. Very woo woo and very like esoteric and easier said than done. Right. But
there are ways to do it. So we can talk about a couple ways where we can get in touch with that body of ours to experience a little bit of grace, a little bit of compassion, a little bit of love for the body that we have. So
like through different, meditation and breath work and movement, embodiment practices, like I've shared about a lot.
Time and time again, yeah.
But yeah, another thing too is eye gazing in the mirror.
Ooh, like looking at yourself?
So you look at yourself, you look at your left eye, because left is for receiving.
Ooh, interesting.
And you spend like 5 minutes without breaking eye contact and like doing affirmations, like saying all the nice things to yourself. And be really aware too. I know that's been a journey of mine, of realizing how often I disassociate from experiences like this, and just kind of do it to, check a box and like, oh yeah, I'm doing the right stuff, but not really being present and receiving it, the gift of my time.
Yeah.
And so that's another thing, right? It's like I'm disassociating, and so I'm not really being present with the time that I have carved out for myself, and so it feels like, oh, I don't ever do anything.
Right, and you're filling that time of like, oh, I have all these things I need to be doing, and instead I'm taking time for myself. Oh.
Yeah, and so that goes, back with that being awareness, the awareness of how you're spending your time, and the gratitude, and like being present.
Yeah, I like to spend time journaling.
I roll.
I know. I always talk about journaling, but it's so
I know it's
helpful.
been a really good tool for a lot of people.
Oh, yeah. And for me, it really has been. Like, the ways in which I needed to see how I loved myself, and specifically the ways I've been not. The ways that I was writing down where I was like, wow, this is how I'm treating myself? Like, I would never treat other people like this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why am I doing that to myself repeatedly? So that gave me like it gave me a play-by-play of my not helpful habits. So I love journaling.
You have a couple of journal prompts you want to share?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
For self-love?
Great question. I love journal prompts. So a journal prompt that I ask myself fairly regularly is, to start off, it's of what am I afraid? And I ask that question because I'm often afraid of the stuff that's going on inside me. And so if I pay attention to and acknowledge the fear in me, then I can learn to love whatever version of me or part of me is feeling that fear. So it gives me a little bit of insight into to love myself at all levels. Right? Like even when I'm not feeling well. So there's one there. Another great journal prompt that I like to start is, what have I created or what am I celebrating? So if you are able to look at yourself and lift yourself up and say, look at like I've done good, and I'm proud of myself, and I get to celebrate these things, that also increases your self-love, because it's not just about doing stuff and like, oh, now that I've done enough, I deserve love. But it's also being able to say, look at how I show up in the world. And the way that I show up in the world is worth celebrating and worth loving. And then what would the younger version of myself need that it didn't get? So if you think about it in a particular moment, so you're feeling sad because there's a person in your life who didn't give you the kind of attention that you wanted them to give you. So think to yourself in that space when you're on your own, okay, what was I looking for that I didn't get when I was a kid? What was something that I was missing when I was younger? And you can say to yourself, I was missing space. I was missing someone holding space for me, or I was perceiving that this person was going to leave me and walk away. And so I felt my abandonment stuff come up. And so I can choose then to give myself, my little self, the love that they didn't get or perceived they didn't get when they were younger. And so for me, what that looked like was saying something along the lines of, why am I so sad that this person, this was a while ago, but why was I so sad this person canceled on our date that we had set up for Friday? And like, it felt frustrating because we had said we were going to spend the time and I had planned and done all the things, and then they just left. Like, how awful is that? And then I thought, oh, what am I reflecting from when I was younger? I'm remembering when I would say, hey, I'd like to do this with you, Dad or Mom, and then they'd get busy, and it's nothing nefarious, but it reminds me of those wounds. And so I get to love myself, and I get to say, hey, I get to show up for me tonight. I get to show up for me today. And so I would read, or I would write poetry for myself, or I would write myself a song, or play some music, or anything that I found enjoyable, play a game, something like that. So I like doing that. I like doing personal stuff. But when you are able to journal and write that stuff down, then you're able to be more aware. So
Nice.
Thanks. What do you do?
I dance.
Nice.
I put on music. I love moving. Yeah, I mean, that's part of my like sensual embodiment gig. I'll put a playlist in the show notes too that you can sign up on my email and get my playlist if you're into sensual embodiment. But you can put on any type of music. Again, doesn't have to be sensual, sexual, whatever. If that is not your thing. But I enjoy the more like sultry kind of like flowy kind of music. And I just let my body move freely. And like allow it to express itself. And I don't always look at what I'm doing in the mirror because it doesn't really matter what I'm looking like. And then that can be like a next level, of like dancing or moving in front of the mirror and like looking at yourself, and again, using your awareness or meditation sort of approach where you're quieting the mind, looking and viewing without judgment. And then the next step would be to look and view yourself moving in the mirror with appreciation and love and gratitude and honor and reverence. And
How long
then
do you do that for?
I mean, I just put on a couple songs, usually 4 or 5 songs.
Oh, sure.
And move through those. Yeah. And I think everyone knows about like affirmations. I kind of have issues with affirmations sometimes where again, it's about the intention, I think.
Right.
And I think oftentimes people will do affirmations without actually being present to what they're saying. And I think, quite frankly, affirmations are useless unless there's an emotion or feeling that gets tied into it. Because otherwise it's like separating mind and body. Where you're like saying these things. This is a lot of Joe Dispenza's teachings, where you're saying these things, but you're feeling completely opposite. And so there's like an incongruence and a disconnect between mind and body. And the only way for my belief, my understanding and like experience, like for affirmations to truly work, you have to include the body, which includes emotions and feelings. And so you'll hear people say, do your affirmations or say these things in the mirror to yourself until you feel it, like feel that it's true.
Right.
And so that's my little caveat around using affirmations as a self-care and self-love practice. And then last but not least is self-pleasure as a healing spiritual experience, as well as a pleasurable sexual experience.
We can talk about it. It's not just sex, but it is sex too.
For sure. There's a lot to self-pleasure, and like I said, I plan on doing an episode purely on that to dive deeper. But I mean, there's lots of different ways to go about it. Again, it's essentially masturbation is what we're talking about, but it's like there is a level of presence and intention that you bring to it that I think is typically not present in a lot of masturbation settings.
Accurate.
And so we call it self-pleasure because also to me that sounds more like holy and like reverent and like it's an honoring and appreciation experience, again with the intention.
Right.
But I will use the bathtub water. I will use my hands, and also I have wands, which are crystal wand products that they have a lot of. So there's a company that I use called Wands with 2 A's, WAANDS. And I'll link this in the show notes too. They've given me a promo code for you to get 10% off. It's just SAM at checkout.
Easy peasy.
Yeah, I'll put all that and like there's a link and stuff in the show notes if you're interested in learning more about their products, and like there's a lot of education on their website too, but it's essentially like a crystal dildo. If I'm being like honest,
straightforward,
and straightforward about it, yeah. And the crystals, they have different crystals that have like different properties And all that's explained too if you're not like familiar with crystals, but they all they all have different energies and different things that they can support you with. And it's not like have any harmful chemicals or things like that a lot of things do. Right. And it's also again an emphasis and intention on slow pleasure. It's not like a vibrator where there's like this
quick build up and then release and then you're done. Right.
Yeah. And also, I mean, I don't really like vibrators like that, because I think that there's a way that it disconnects us from, kind of what's natural. And yeah, it's really, really quick. And that's not the way that women are designed to work. Again, with like going back to women and the differences that we have there. But
not that you can't, but not that you can't use one.
Yeah, but I mean, do whatever you want to do. That's just my belief. My 2 cents on it. But yeah, so wands, and then like a yoni egg also, which is an egg base. It's exactly what it sounds like. It looks like an egg. It's a crystal egg that you would insert, and you can use any of that stuff. But that's for the reason I say that it's like a spiritual journey also, and not only about like the sexual pleasure of it. Like there is that, but there's also this like the slowness of it brings you into a presence, and you are awakening that like sexual energy and that sacral chakra, which is very creative energy, and it's very powerful energy too, because it can literally create life. And so whenever you bring an intention to that space and that practice, like it's really incredibly potent and powerful. And like, talk about sex magic, which like, if that's a new term for you, you can look it up or, stay tuned.
More is coming.
Yeah. So, I think that's all I'll say about that for now. More
is on the way. A part 2.
Yeah. Part 2 for that particular spot. That particular realm of self-love, self-care things. Yeah. And so I think, just to wrap up too, there's so many ways that you can go about it, and these are just a few tips that I hope you find helpful. I think the biggest thing too is like whatever it is you enjoy to do, like create time for it.
Yes.
Period.
Nice. Good.
Yeah. Do you have anything to add?
I feel complete. I love that idea of creating time for you, because we create time for everything else in the whole entire world, and we often forget to take time for ourselves.
Yeah, you're number one. Don't ever forget it, because if you don't have a full cup, you're not pouring anything but air. And yeah, I'm a really firm believer in filling up your cup. And if it's not working for you, find a way. Find a way. Find people to support you in filling up your cup, so that you can give from the overflow. Because I said so.
It's good for you. Do what I say.
All right, we'll catch you next time.
Bye.
If you found parts of this podcast interesting, useful, or at the very least entertaining, I hope that you'll share your takeaways and tag me on social media, or leave a review. And we appreciate you, and we'll see you next time.